Today we're going to be talking about the books that didn't make it into the Bible, or as they are commonly known, the Apocrypha. I would first like to define what exactly the Apocrypha is, then follow that by providing a brief history of these texts. Through learning about these books that have been excluded from our Protestant Bibles, I hope that we can both guard ourselves from being confused when they are mentioned, and to also learn what uses these texts can have for our lives today. The Apocrypha is a series of texts written between 400 BC and 1 AD that fill the gap left between the Old and New Testament, which is commonly known as the 400 Years of Silence. They were first included in the Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint in 200 BC. The term Apocrypha means hidden away, which has led some to believe that these texts contain secret or mysterious knowledge too profound to be communicated to the common Christian. However, this is a bit of a misnomer, as in the pejorative sense, these texts were probably hidden away because it was determined that they could be a danger to those without the knowledge of how to approach them properly. Jewish and Protestant circles take issue with the theological ideas espoused in the Apocrypha, and reject that these writings are in any way authoritative. This is not the case for those of the Catholic and Orthodox church tradition, who instead refer to these works as the deuterocanonical works, and keep them within their Bibles as scripture. These differences in approaching the Apocrypha have led to many differences in belief between Protestants and Catholics. For instance, the Catholic Church uses passages within the Apocrypha to justify beliefs such as prayers for the dead and almsgiving as an act of penance, theology which is not supported by those within the Protestant tradition. The status of the Apocrypha within the varied interpretations of Christianity can largely be explained by looking at the history of these texts, or rather the history of how these texts have been used. Jesus and the New Testament authors never directly quote any passages from the Apocrypha. However, many like Paul would have carried the Septuagint as their Bible, which would have included these works, so there are echoes and allusions present in the New Testament. Yet even with these allusions, there are no statements that would imply inspiration for these texts. The early church fathers, however, used these texts extensively, even adding them to the normal liturgy of the church. Things changed during the time of Augustine and Jerome, who took opposing views on these texts. Augustine argued for the canonicity of the gospel, while Jerome argued that there should be a difference between canonical texts that inform faith and practice and ecclesiastical texts, which are to be read for edification but not to create doctrine. The church as a whole sided with Augustine during the Council of Carthage, but the two views remained within the church until the Reformation. It was at this point, as a reaction to the creation of the Protestant tradition, that the Catholic Church officially canonized these scriptures, a move which many Protestant confessions pushed back against. Various positions were adopted, but generally it was decided that within Protestantism, the Apocrypha was to be considered the same as any other man-made text. That is not to say that the early Protestant fathers like Calvin and Luther relegated these texts to the trash heap of history. Far from it. Both recognize the uses that these texts had for Christians, which leads us to the question of what we are supposed to do with these texts today. In recent years, there's been a move towards touting different sections of the Apocrypha, such as the Gospel of Thomas, as bearers of secret knowledge that the church intended to bury. Notable examples of this phenomenon include the Da Vinci Code and the Jesus Seminar, both of which use apocryphal writing to come to wild conclusions about the life of Jesus. To avoid making these same mistakes, it is important that we remember that these texts are not inspired. We are not to use them to form doctrine. However, there are ways that these texts can be beneficial to us. One way is to help us gain historical understanding. By reading texts such as 1st and 2nd Maccabees, we can learn a lot about Second Temple Judaism and how the Jews dealt with the tide of Hellenization that was sweeping through their culture. We can glean valuable information about the Maccabean revolt, which greatly influenced the messianic expectation of the Jews at the time of Jesus. Learning about this period directly before Jesus' arrival can greatly improve our understanding of the culture in which he lived and ministered. Another way is to provide theological and spiritual benefits. A careful reading of the Apocrypha can certainly yield benefits for the discerning Christian. Just as any other uninspired human writing contains both truth and error, so too does the Apocrypha contain both good theological ideas and bad ones. As long as one is able to find the errors, these texts can be uplifting like any theological book or poem written today. Thank you for listening to this short lesson on the Apocrypha. I hope I was able to help you understand these texts and the role they should play in Christianity. I hope you have a blessed day.